There's no other class with a longer lasting impact than the Warrior. With an indomitable presence and by far the best knockdowns in Dragon's Dogma 2, Warrior quickly became one of my top tier picks and the one I've been maining for the past 20 or so hours. So you know the drill by now. We're going over the positives, the negatives, and some of my favorite tips to truly unleash lots and lots of pain. Now early on, warriors might feel a bit slow and sluggish, but it gets better as you get used to it. Early on, Barge, which is your R1 special, is going to help a ton with that to pretty much charge into the enemy and interrupt their attacks. This is going to give you that exact window of opportunity that you need to land up your devastating hits, which usually take no more than 1 or 2 swings to devastate almost any enemy. Now, one of your first starting weapon skills is the Heavenward Sunder, an upgrade of the Skyward Sunder. This is one of my favorite abilities in the game, as this lets you do a very powerful charged uppercut that completely destroys enemies' defenses, especially against boss enemies. This was one of the best ways to begin a knockdown, or at least make enemies flinch and open them up to some other possible stuns later on. The damage on this is also very strong, and it's a great opener through and through, so you can pretty much use this from the beginning of the game all the way to the end game. Since it's a charged attack, this is also extremely difficult to interrupt, especially once you level up your knockdown resist, so you can literally stay in front of the boss attack and charge this up with very little repercussion. Now early on, I really enjoyed comboing this with the Indomitable Lash, which is this overhead sort of executioner style hit that completely devastates enemies, especially when you hit them in the weak points. So normally I would suggest reserving this attack for when the boss is fully stunned and on the ground and their weak points are exposed, so head area, hearts, wings, and so on, because once you hit them with a fully charged attack like this, you're going to instantly erase entire HP bars, sometimes even multiple at a time. So this was one of the best options that I've used all the way into the end game, and by far one of the highest damage dealers until some of the other master skills later on. Now for smaller enemies, we do have lots of options. One of them was Diluvian Strike. I really liked this one because it essentially lets you quickly leap into the air and then immediately descend back on the target, which completely smashes and squeezes them between your hard weapon and the ground. This is going to completely destroy their HP bars, but I found this to work extremely well against any target that normally is protected from the front side, because you're basically leaping above them, you're essentially coming from above. This is going to make you hit them, usually in the head or other weak points, and even if you don't, it's still going to completely incapacitate them, opening up for a lot more finishing moves. So overall, by far the best ability for some of the smallest targets. However, we do have other options in there as well. One such option is the Ravening Lunge, possibly my favorite ability in the entire game. Not only is this a great traversal mechanic for the warrior, but it also impales literally anything in your path with your absolutely massive weapon. And it doesn't matter if they try to deflect or block it, they won't be able to. You're literally going to take anything like a train, just hit them and then smash them against surfaces, or even better, throw them off cliffs. That's definitely one of my favorite pastimes. Seriously, this is going to give the warrior that feeling of satisfaction and complete destruction that you've been searching for, while also looking like a complete madman as you're doing it. Now, before we move on to the truly devastating stuff, there are some other abilities that are situationally good. They are not maybe top tier, but in certain situations they can definitely feel very fun. One of them is the Tidal Wrath, which is kind of like this counter attack, very similar to the Thief's one, that you can pull off by simply triggering this ability as an attack is about to land. However, with a comparison with the Thief, this seems to have a much more forgiving window of opportunity, plus of course you're following up with much more devastating attacks which can actually hit multiple targets. And besides sending them flying, it also seems that damage on it is really great. I would give this a B+, maybe even an A-, because it was pretty fun. However, on very few occasions you actually want to sit there and intercept these types of attacks. You usually want to be the first one to hit enemies and be done with them before they have a chance to react. I'm not really a big fan of the Raising Sweep, even though it is an early option and a pretty decent one at AoE. You can either do a singular sweep or a double one if you fully charge this ability. However, if targets tend to be very protected from the front, you're kind of going to lose a ton of damage, as you're not going to hit them in the weak points compared to some of the other skills. It is good if you hit them from the back, but otherwise I found this to be quite underwhelming. Plus, you're kind of stationary and can't move, so you're pretty much open to jump attacks and other ranged attacks from enemies. Now there's also the Windstorm Slash, and I still struggle to understand why this ability even exists in the first place, as we kinda already have the Mighty Sweep that achieves the exact same result, the same animation and damage, by just using your regular attacks and pressing the buttons again at the right moment. So I guess this might be slightly better. It is decent, for example, at knocking enemies over. If you have the time window of opportunity to hit them in the legs or in their bodies, it can definitely cause up that stagger to eventually happen, but literally all of your attacks eventually will. And even more so, it doesn't seem to be that particularly strong in burn phases either. Like, yes, you can totally hit enemies in the weak spots like heads and whatnot, but it seems to deal significantly less damage in the same time window compared to some of the previous skills that we already covered, especially since those are almost instant the moment you trigger them, and they erase a lot more of the enemy's HP bar. Again, I don't see the reason for this to even exist. Maybe a different one could have taken its place and have something more special happen. But besides this, we also have In Spirit. It's a pretty decent support ability to have, as this is going to let you boost yourself out of a stun situation. There are very few that I found to even exist later on in the game once you get a ton of knockdown resist, but there are a few enemies that can kind of bypass that. This can help a ton with that downtime. And then there's also the Roar, which is going to help to attract enemy aggro. I guess it can be helpful if you're setting them up for some of the other AoE sweep attacks so that you can unleash your most powerful and devastating hits. However, in the late game, there are two very strong abilities we're gonna use. One of them is going to be this Mountain Breaker, a much better version in my opinion than the Heavenward Sunder, as it also has a better range. But the downside is that you're not going to hit enemies low to the ground at all. However, against bigger enemies like flying bosses even, and especially Cyclops, you can so easily stagger them pretty much in one hit. And against flying targets, you can bring them back from the sky all the way to the ground and completely stun them in maybe one extra hit. No joke, against dragons, this seems to be amazing. There were more than a few occasions in which I was able to pierce through a dragon's heart with this from the ground level as it was flying. Plus, this opens them up for some of the other abilities once you stun them. So overall, amazing option to have if you're planning to go against exclusively bosses. If you're planning to also use this against smaller enemies, then just go with the previous Heavensward Sunder. That's going to be your option for general usage. Of course, Warrior's biggest, highest damage dealer in the entire game is going to be Arc of Might. This is going to be your master skill. I'm going to talk about how to unlock this the earliest in just a bit, but this is going to be your biggest, longest wind-up attack that's going to also consume your entire stamina bar. But once you unleash it, you're going to delete 2, 3 maybe entire HP bars from any enemy. I'm talking about full-on one shot with this thing, so it doesn't matter if you're going to sleep right after. By the way, for this ability especially, but also the previous ones, I highly encourage you to use any mage with celerity so that you can improve the time window for the charge up timer. It takes about 10 seconds for this ability, but you can make that a bit faster. Once your character fully glows, this is when you will know it's time to fully unleash it. You're going to do this first swing followed by an overhead slash, so that's double damage right there. That pretty much means 2 HP bars. That's the highest I've seen even against some of these dragons. So for this, you're going to need to complete the side mission called Cloth Them Into Shape for Baron right here at his camp, very close to Melv, but you will need to head over during nighttime to find him. Also, make sure that you bring 3 of the cheapest swords you can buy from Vernworth, as that's going to immediately finish the first objective. From this point on, he's going to need a motivated soldier, so you're going to find one in Vernworth, very close to the barbershop in the area. Don't worry, he's going to be the one to approach you as soon as you hit that area. Once done, head back to its camp, and now Baron is going to challenge you to a demonstration duel. You can simply just throw him out of the circle, which is going to be enough to win you that fight and finish that objective. And from this point on, just progress through it. There are some enemies that you're going to have to fight with, including a Cyclops later on. But once you're done with all of this, eventually he's also going to finish that quest for you and also give you the first part of your reward, which is the Life Taker Greatsword, a really awesome option early on. And then the later stages, which is also going to give you that skill, is going to be right here at the checkpoint Rest Town. Once you head over into Batal, you're going to find his house by the side of the road right here to the left side, once you go over here and speak to him, he's going to pretty much teach that to you, assuming that your reputation with him was high enough. But in my case, it was by simply doing the mission for him just now. Additionally, you can just do an escort mission for him, and this is eventually going to raise that reputation enough for him to give you that really awesome skill. As far as your passives slash core skills go, you have the Bulwark, which is what's going to keep you alive during charging phases. This is going to greatly reduce the damage taken by enemies. Then you have the Breakneck Strike. This is going to make your charge attacks, which is like most of your attacks, to deal greater damage. This is what's going to absolutely destroy enemies, and look out for your character glowing. That's when you know you can unleash these. Then you have the Chain of Blows. This is what's going to turn your Mighty Sweep into this series of faster and faster attacks the better you get at pressing the attack button at the right moment. So it's kind of like a dance that you have to play, becoming increasingly faster the faster your blows go. And finally, you have Repulse, which is kind of like a counter attack, but you kind of have to hit an enemy in its hand with your own attack as it's about to swing at you. Don't worry about it too much, it's just nice to have one in case it happens. And in terms of augments, you have Vitality. This gives you about 200 damage, so you can just scrap this off if you have enough of HP and don't need more of it. There's also Impact. However, I don't usually push nor pull targets as it's not needed, so I tend to just completely overlook this. Then there's Pertinacity. This is what you're going to need, as this is going to let you break through enemies' guards. Yes, this includes ones with shields, so it's pretty much one blow to completely do that. And then Dominance, to augment your knockdown power. You're going to want a lot of knockdown power for your warrior, so this also includes the dwarven smithing and everything else on your gear. Intrepidity also sounds really interesting. This reduces that accumulation of loss gauge when you receive damage, so combined with your very high defenses and large HP pool, this means you can go for much longer in combat without needing to rest. However, I prefer a lot more damage and knockdown, so I typically go for other options, but it can also be very good if you struggle with surviving, especially against bigger bosses. Anyway, I would say Warrior is by far one of the best in the entire game, definitely extremely fun to pull off. It's going to be different compared to some of the other swifter classes, but totally worth it, as you can survive a lot longer and it's a lot more forgiving to many of the other options, especially since you're not gonna get knocked down as much as the others. So give it a try, let me know what you think. In the meantime, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.